Make sure, like any good recipe, that you're working with good ingredients. So like a really strong algorithm, well-written, or series of algorithms, right? And a good data set. So what do I mean by a good data set? Because I think this is almost as important as the prompt. You want to be very specific on who can use it and what it can be used for, and then teach them about the specific usage of it. Put it in your policies if you have policies, so that you can fire someone who uses it out of turn. Downside of that is, right, if it's in your policies and you don't follow those policies, they can be used against you in court. A lot of these tools are new. The fact that they're popping up like wildfire is not a good sign. In an unregulated industry like cybersecurity and AI, which is largely unregulated, anyone can pop up and market a product as their own, or say it does X, Y, or Z, and they will continue to do that until they get sanctioned.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us for another Justia webinar. My name is Nina, and I'll be the moderator for today. Now, to kick things off, I want to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today, Sarah Anderson. Sarah W. Anderson founded SWA Law LLC and LegallyCyber.com, representing public and private entities on cyber incident response, regulatory compliance, the implementation of enhanced cybersecurity practices, artificial intelligence integration, and contract negotiations involving technology products and services. Sarah teaches seminars on cybersecurity law across the United States for nonprofits, trade associations, corporate entities, and government entities. In less than 3 years, Sarah expanded SWA Law LLC from a solo practice to 3 attorneys and 1 certified information privacy professional. The webinar presentation that you're about to watch will be approximately 1 hour, and Sarah will be taking questions from the audience once the presentation is wrapped up today, time permitting. So if you have questions, you can always submit those by clicking into the Q&A button in your control panel and sending them in there. Now, without further ado, here is Sarah to discuss ethical rules for artificial intelligence.
Thank you so much, Nina. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Anderson, coming to you live from the lovely Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where we are having our second cold snap, which is super annoying. So as stated, my name is Sarah Anderson. I am a cybersecurity and artificial intelligence law attorney, also referred to as a tech attorney. I love all things technology. I got my first computer when I was 3 years old. My parents, and I'm 41, so that should take you back to the mid to late 1980s. My parents worked in tech, and they just kind of passed the love on down to me. And when I found myself kind of wanting to get out of big law and doing the type of litigation I was doing, it just felt like a natural transition. And I really hope you enjoy this, because one of my primary goals whenever I give presentations like this is to try to make it very easy and digestible. I feel like too often when you get a presentation on like a newer subject, or kind of, I guess, what some people would think to be like a really boring subject like tech, sometimes the instructors want to make it complicated to sort of show off their knowledge. I assure you, I am zero plans of doing that today, especially as a former LD kid. My job is to make it easy. So every presentation I give has a theme, and this one is no different. And today our theme is treating artificial intelligence kind of like a temptation, right? It's fine in small doses. My biggest temptation is food. Now, I'm not sure if that's just because I'm an elder millennial and I grew up in the Kate Moss era where heroin chic was sort of the thing. But for me, my temptation has been and always will be food. And I think you should treat AI like whatever your temptation is, whether it's video games, alcohol, whatever it is that you just, your dirty pleasure, a little online gambling. You got to treat it as something taken in moderation, and realize that like it's something that you can overuse and definitely abuse. It will have a bad impact on your practice, your life, if you rely on it too strongly. So, most of the times I see lawyers utilizing AI is because they're just on too many deadlines. They couldn't possibly get the brief written. They forgot to take notes from the meeting, or they work for an insurance company who's very religious on making sure everything is done within the timelines that they've allowed for this particular task. And so if they're only giving, a certain time to analyze a deposition or review a deposition, but the deposition is 800 pages, the insurance company doesn't care, right? They still want it to be done within a certain period of time. And so I see a lot of, those types of attorneys facing those internal struggles resorting to AI. And I'm here today to kind of warn you that it's not always a good thing. So treat it like a temptation where you use it in moderation, carefully, you monitor what you do with it, and it'll probably be fine. But I'm here today to sort of be your doomsday prepper. This is our agenda. It is pretty basic. The first thing I want to do is kind of talk to you about what artificial intelligence actually is. I want everyone to have a decent understanding of what it is, and I promise you it's not complicated. It's kind of like a cooking recipe with 2 ingredients. Now, you're not going to understand one of the ingredients, and I certainly don't understand one of those ingredients, but I can at least make it so you can recognize it. Then we'll talk about types of AI and machine learning, common uses in the workplace, the benefits of the workplace, which I will tell you that section is very short because it is described as a temptation, the hazards of it, and then I'm going to give you some empirical rules for AI in the workplace. I had a law professor tell one of my co-students one time that she looked like the kind of girl who liked an empirical rule, which he meant as a dig that she wasn't that smart, but I don't see what's wrong with an empirical rule in certain circumstances, especially when you're being a little bit conservative. I do like to color outside the lines for the most part in my practice and see what we can push the limits with, but this is one of the areas where I will not do that. So I think an empirical rule can help you. All right, let's start about talking about what the heck is artificial intelligence. Like what is that? It's essentially 2 components. All right, the first one is an algorithm. All right, so first question, what is an algorithm? Well, I don't know if you guys saw the 2010 movie about the development and creation of Facebook. They have Jesse, what's his name? He's playing Mark Zuckerberg, and he's got, his buddy Eduardo and him are building Facebook, and it starts off with a bunch of like weird characters, kind of looks like the Pythagorean theorem, whatever it was in geometry that I clearly didn't pay attention to, right? And it's characters and numbers all written together and some mathematical symbols, and it makes no sense to the naked eye. That is an algorithm. It is just a string of characters, and all those characters do is give you a series of if then. If this, then this. In other words, if you ask this question, answer this question, right? And all that is just a command prompt, but it's written in computer gibberish. So you're not expected to understand it. But that is the first portion of artificial intelligence, is that you have an algorithm, all right, which is just, again, a command prompt, very if then. Then you have the second part, right? And that is your data set. Your data set is obviously digital, right? Because a digital, command prompt or set of instructions for, a computer cannot, read what's in your paper library, right? So it is digital information that is all tagged. All right. So your data set is digital information. It is all tagged, meaning that, subsets of the information are labeled as different things. Animals. And then with the animal category, you have like cat, dog. And then maybe you have another one that says science. And then one is like medicine, physics, chemistry, little things like that. However, the data set could be all encompassing. What does that mean? It means it's all of the internet, right? So when you have artificial intelligence tools, you want to make sure, like any good recipe, that you're working with good ingredients. So like a really strong algorithm, well written, or series of algorithms, right? And a good data set. So what do I mean by a good data set? Because I think this is almost as important as the prompt. A good data set meaning the data is properly tagged, it's correct, right? And it's not open source to everything in the internet, right? Because I don't know about you, but I don't want people believing that they're saving money with the Disney Vacation Club influencing my data set. Because if you believe that, I have a unicorn in my backyard that I would love to sell you, right? It's invisible. And I take cash or cashier's check only for this invisible unicorn. But essentially, you don't want these crazies that are out there believing, God only knows what, or you don't want, no offense to anyone out there, but if you're a flat earther, I would put you in the Disney Vacation Club category. You don't want them sitting there and influencing your data set. You want to make sure your data set is good information, and you want it to be a well-rounded set of good information on whatever topic you have. And then you also want it to be protected. In other words, and consistently supplemented. Very few topics in life, with the exception of like basic math or something that is only designed to target like 6th grade math, right, are static. So you want a data set that is being consistently updated with new information. We learn about new species, new wildlife statistics, right? If you're studying animals, we learn about new treatments and medicines. So you want to make sure that data set is updated, but you also want to protect it from what is called data poisoning, meaning someone can go in there and mess with your data set to give you false results. And that is actually seen a lot with national security issues. When people talk about AI, you may hear data poisoning, or we got to protect our data from other people because we don't want another country poisoning that data set. But all of these said, you've got two parts to it, right? A really good algorithm written by someone who knows what they're doing that can issue various instructions to the data set or pull information out of the data set, depending on what it's designed to do. And then your second part is the actual data set, making sure it's properly tagged, it's truthful information, and if needed, it's updated consistently, and it's not just everything that they could find. In other words, when you do a basic Google search and you're asking, a specific question into Google, they're going to pull up Reddit threads. Well, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying everyone on Reddit is a moron, but I would say, just like the rest of the population, there's a high statistical probability you're going to have a lot of people who are lunatics answering the question. You don't want them in your data set. So those are your two components, your two ingredients in this recipe to create artificial intelligence. So anytime people try to make you feel dumb, just remember it's two things: an algorithm and it's a data set. Don't let anyone else confuse you. All right, now we've talked about what is AI composed of, two ingredients. Now let's talk about three different types of AI, because this is going to be important as we move along. The first one is artificial narrow intelligence. This is something that does one thing and one thing only. So I, being the super fancy, lawyer that I am, right? My Honda Pilot has AI. And if you think super fancy lawyers don't drive Hondas, you would probably be correct, because I'm not fancy. But my point is that my Honda Pilot has cameras on it, and it lets me know when I'm getting too close to something, and it beeps at me, which is very useful to me because I am an abhorrent driver, which is why I have to drive, the smallest big SUV I can find. And so it lets me know when I'm coming too close to something. That's basic narrow artificial intelligence. It does one thing. It's designed to beep at me when I get too close and beep louder when I get any closer. In other words, doing the wrong thing. Another example is your Walmart chatbot. So if you're like me, you are in love with the idea of having your groceries delivered, or you can just drive up to the store and pick them out. Even though this weekend I did get old moldy vegetables, which was, a definite fail. But you love the idea of being able to pick up your groceries because you're busy, right? You're taking an online course in ethics and you want me to get through it as quickly as possible. But unfortunately, I do have to satisfy a certain amount of time. And so you order your groceries online and they send you an email saying it's either ready for pickup or it's en route. And then you get your groceries, whether you pick them up or not, and something's wrong. You're missing something. You got the wrong thing. What do you do? You have a couple of options at that point. Your first option is you can call Walmart. Nobody wants to do that, and good luck getting someone to answer the phone. Your second option is you can go into the Walmart, which you obviously don't want to do if you ordered groceries from Walmart or they're being delivered. And your third option is chat with us. In other words, get on your app or your phone or your computer, log into your account, and tell them there's something wrong with their order. Well, those chat bots, until you actually reach a person, are usually examples of artificial narrow intelligence. Their job is to just get you to the right issue, figure out your issue, and then put you in the right spot, right? So they'll ask, do you need help with a current order or previous order? And you say previous order. Is this the order? Yes, right? Is something missing? And they prompt you and ask you to tell them what to do next. That is artificial narrow intelligence. That's something very basic, very simple, right? Singular function. And I find these to be the most useful and the most reliable of all forms of artificial intelligence. The next one is artificial general intelligence. This is your Chat GPT, your Copilot, right? They are designed to handle a wide range of tasks. They're supposed to be capable of human-like reasoning. They're supposed to be able to, anticipate the unanticipated. In other words, do your research and generate an answer almost immediately, regardless of what your topic is, right? So write me a poem about love. Summarize this book for me, answer this math equation for me. My children like to, even though they're not supposed to, put in their word problems for their homework sometimes into ChatGPT when I'm not looking, and there it is. There's the answer to their question. And it uses what's called natural language processing, meaning it recognizes the languages you're using, puts the words together in a human-like form, and translates what you're actually trying to say, so that even if your grammar or your spelling stinks, it can still figure it out. And then you have your artificial superintelligence. This is basically where the capabilities are designed to mimic human brains, but with emotion, with conversational skills, and they're supposed to surpass what the person can do. In other words, this is your R2D2, right? He is a robot. He is supposed to respond like an adult, like another, well-informed individual is. They are designed to mimic emotions, recognize emotions and what's being said, and not just, reverberate some sort of memorized answer from the data set that they've been provided. We don't really see much artificial superintelligence as day-to-day consumers. I would imagine any really ready-to-market artificial superintelligence is kept pretty tight under lock and key. There are actually laws in the United States. There's one of the few federal laws on artificial intelligence is against artificial superintelligence being allowed to reproduce. I have no idea what that would mean. I don't know that two computers can bump uglies and create a little baby computer, but there actually is a law against that. So you're not going to see a lot of machine consciousness, which is your artificial superintelligence, in day-to-day life. Most commonly, again, you're going to have artificial narrow with your car or with your Walmart or Target pickups or whatever. And then you're going to have general artificial intelligence with your Copilot, right? Your ChatGPT, stuff like that. All right. Now, 3 types of machine learning. You're like, wait, we were just talking about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are sort of like a pie chart, or not a pie chart. What are those overlapping circle charts? Where you've got the middle. You cannot have artificial intelligence without machine learning. It is essentially one and the same. And there are 3 types, one being the most commonly used, which creates the problems we're going to talk about today. You're also going to see on the screen that we have an adorable little yellow lab puppy. So I know I said our theme today was treat AI like a temptation. Now we're going to shift themes just very slightly, right? And we're going to talk about machine learning in terms of a dog, right? You have, this perfect little adorable puppy, right? This is the infantile version of machine learning, right? And what the dog becomes later in life will reflect, what type of machine learning it had. All right, the first type is supervised learning. Everything is labeled, and they say this is a dog, this is a cat, this is a fish. And then you show the AI and you show them 3 pictures of a cat, a dog, and a fish, and it has to match which one you're talking about, right? That is supervised. In other words, I'm teaching you directly how to do this, and then I'm asking you to do another thing with direct supervision. And if you're wrong, I will correct you. If you're right, I will reward you. So it is supervised learning like you would ideally do with a puppy. Right? Don't pee on the floor. You pee on the floor, I spray you with a water bottle, or if you're old school like me and my family, you might get a swat on the butt, right? So that you at least know where your nose rubbed in it not to do it again. Whereas if you go outside and you pee, you get a treat. That is supervised learning. All right. Then you have no learning, right? Or no supervised learning. And this is where the data that is fed to the AI model doesn't have any labels associated with it. And you're asking the AI or the machine learning to kind of put it into categories as opposed to recognize what it is exactly. This is much more of a loosey-goosey standard, so to speak. It is designed so that like the data can eventually be synthesized into a more simple mentality. But it is, I would say, not nearly as common. Much more common is supervised than unsupervised. And the last one, reinforcement learning, which can be similar to supervised learning, is the most common. This is what almost every single internet tool uses. All right. And while it sounds good, right? The learning algorithm, the machine learning receives an reward when it gets something right. It's, told when it's got something wrong. The downside is unlike with supervised learning, which is done by someone who's an expert in the field and understands how the tool is supposed to work and the type of, response you want to get, reinforcement learning is done by the general public, right? Now I want you to think about everyone in your family tree. But you want them training your dog or teaching your child anything. There are people in my family tree I don't allow to speak to my children for very, very good reason, right? That means every psycho out there is participating in this, right? In other words, the algorithm produces a response based on its data set, and the individual user tells it whether it's good or bad. In other words, is this something that they should be rewarded for, which reinforces it to do exactly that the next time? Let me give you an example. If I type in to a data set using reinforcement machine learning and I say, show me a picture of an American hero, right? In my brain, I expected to come up with like George Washington, Martin Luther King, those are the American heroes that I would expect to pop up, but a lunatic or a member of a neo-Nazi cult, right, is going to show me pictures maybe of current neo-Nazi leaders. I don't know who they would be. Like David Koresh, maybe? Is that wrong? I'm not sure. But in other words, it's going to show me a totally different string of American heroes if that user, the lunatic, has been using this reinforcement machine learning tool over and over again. Because maybe the first time it got George Washington and it got Martin Luther King and it got Sandra Day O'Connor, right? Well, it says, women and, people of color can't be American heroes. That's wrong, and so it tells the machine learning that's not correct. That's not what I'm looking for. So it'll send more and more and more until it learns what it's looking for, kind of like your Spotify playlist, right? Well, over time, that depending on how many people of a particular thought group are using that particular type of reinforcement learning, that tool is going to train itself to respond to the masses who are most likely to use it. So it's not going to be maybe someone who thinks, you know, I mean, you got to be dicey with these things, right? When you're talking to mass audiences, but it's not going to be anyone that I would say a rational human being would consider to be American hero. Um, or at least no one who's smart enough to watch me on this course, right? So reinforcement learning is in all normal artificial generative AI. In other words, it's in your Copilot, right? Which is one of your most commonly used types of AI in the workplace, right? It uses natural language processing, meaning your grammar and your spelling doesn't have to be correct. It understands what you mean just by what you type, right? And it's going to analyze your response to what it puts out, and it's going to try to adapt itself to my personal preference or your personal preference. In other words, if I say, show me an American picture of an American hero, Copilot, it is going to show me, if it's gotten to know me, right, it's going to show me Theodore Roosevelt, and it's going to show me Molly Pitcher from the Revolutionary War. It's going to show me American heroes that maybe I've Googled in the past, or ones that I've responded to in a similar light, if I'm only talking about historical figures, right? Whereas, someone else could get something totally different. Another thing it's going to do is it's also going to learn my humor. If I say, show me some funny memes about cats, and it shows me a bunch of really basic stuff and I don't find it funny, it's going to start to change the humor, right? Maybe it's something kind of twisted. Maybe it's, potty humor, maybe it's like violent humor, and it's going to adapt back to me with that reinforcement, learning, because it's all based on my feedback, right? Well, a lot of people use Copilot in the workplace, right? Because you want it to, summarize your emails. You want to tell it what's next on your to-do list. You had a meeting and you've got all the meeting notes scanned, and they need to go into, Copilot to get summarized, so whatever the due out is for the next meeting, or you're prepared, or your boss asked you to read a bunch of articles, and it's going to pull out information from that article to be prepared for whatever the meeting's about. That is generally what Microsoft wants us to use Copilot for. And what's interesting is they're kind of forcing it on us. If you look at the bottom right hand of your keyboard, you're going to see a little Copilot button. This is my keyboard, which is struggling to be seen, but you will notice it's right there. There's a little Copilot button. So it's being forced on you, whether you realize it or not. And in fact, every single Microsoft machine, anything running Windows that you purchase starting in like 2022 forward, maybe 2021, has Copilot automatically turning on when you turn on the machine. In other words, it launches the application, and you have to uninstall it if you don't want it. I actually uninstall it from every single machine in my office. I don't want it. And I have not been able to find a decent keyboard that doesn't have the automatic button, which always, whenever I accidentally press it with my, one of my big chubby man hands, always ask me if I want to reinstall it. But this is very commonly used in the office, and it is using reinforcement learning, which again, I told you could be very dangerous, right? Other common uses of AI, I'm just checking our time to make sure we're on track, in the workplace are going to be Grammarly and ChatGPT. Everyone knows about ChatGPT. I feel like it is so out there. People are using it for all different things, homework. Some people are just talking to it just to chat, have some, cure some loneliness, whatever it is, or they want to vent about a problem that's bothering them. They don't feel like, torturing the other people in their lives with whatever is upsetting them. Right. And then you've got Grammarly, which is designed to improve people's ability to read and write. Obviously, I think for lawyers, we should find Grammarly particularly annoying because it is so hard to find decent writing these days. And I'm not saying I am amazing or anything like that, but just something clear, in order, organized. And Grammarly is designed to kind of organize your thoughts. It's designed to keep a very focused stream of events while fixing your grammar, your syntax, and your spelling. Whereas ChatGPT will do anything you want. So these are both artificial general intelligence that we see a lot of times in the workplace. And by the way, ChatGPT runs the same type of AI that Copilot runs. So it's interesting because some people are like, well, I don't like Copilot, I don't use ChatGPT. Well, they both are created by OpenAI and use the same version of the software. So if you get very similar results from both and you've been using both, there's a reason why. It's because it's using the same data set and the same software. So don't think that you're better than anybody else by saying, well, I only use ChatGPT or I only use Copilot, because they're exact same thing. And then Google launched theirs in June of 2025, right? They have Gemini, which is their version of Copilot. It's very, very similar. If you've pulled open a browser, you will see that you're, I don't know if you guys have been watching the Olympics lately, but I just think Alyssa Liu, like every other person in America, it's just so amazing. Her routine, and Quad God was so amazing. And I like to find out more about people. I'm really interested in what makes people, their backgrounds and stuff like that. So I'm Googling her and I find out she was born via surrogacy and she essentially has a single dad and she was the result of an egg donor and he fled after Tiananmen Square because he was a dissident and whatnot. Well, it tells you all that in Gemini. I kind of summarized her background with links to the specific articles that it pulled its sources from, which is one thing I do like about Gemini is it at least tells you where your source is from. However, I will caution you that it's not always great about getting the information accurate. So at least I give you the sources, which is why I probably would recommend if you're going to use one, using this maybe above some of the others, because ChatGPT and Copilot are kind of like your drunk uncle at a family event. He's always going to have something to say, but it may not be accurate. We call those people always confident, seldom correct. I'm sure you know a few attorneys in your area that are just like that. And that is how I describe ChatGPT to most people. All right. And we also have some other ones. We have some note takers. These are popping up a lot. These are apps that, you integrate into your, Microsoft Copilot or not Copilot, Microsoft Teams, your Zoom account, and they're designed to dictate everything. And they're also designed to do vocal recognition, right? So in other words, if you have a particular accent, it'll marry that up with the name on the screen. So in other words, if you've got 20 people in this meeting, it's going to learn how everybody sounds and it's going to take their username in it. And they're going to say, and then username said this and username said this. So it's designed to also, detect emotion in their voice. If someone gets very loud all of a sudden, it should note that. These are interesting because on one hand, I think it's incredibly fascinating how they work, but you also have to be careful with biometric information privacy laws, which we will get to later in this presentation, and also confidentiality issues, which we will get to in this presentation. But I do see a lot more people using this more and more. And I will tell you, if you ever have a meeting with me and I see one of these enter the chat and say, oh, do you mind if my note taker joins? My answer is I absolutely do. You can call me back on my cell if you would like, and I will exit the meeting almost immediately. Obviously, I say that while I'm on a Justia webinar. But these are the things you do to help educate the public on the dangers of AI when you're a little bit of a paranoid freak. All right, now let's talk about the benefits of AI. This is intentionally a very short portion because I think you should treat it very conservatively. Again, kind of like a temptation, right? I do think it's a good record keeping tool. So if you really need to know everything that was said in that board meeting and you don't just want generic minutes, I don't think having an AI record keeper is a bad deal, right? It's excellent for any type of mathematics, graphs, or anything that you're looking for a pattern or repetition. It is amazing. In other words, predicting, fluctuations in a particular product based on the time of year, anything mathematical related, I think AI is a great tool. It is so much better than like you trying to do it yourself, unless of course you're some sort of savant, right? If you're trying to predict costs of, a particular type of litigation for an insurer or for another case or whatever, you want to look at all the different costs, of previous cases, right? And you have some sort of AI tool that'll help you predict costs, like was there expert depositions? What was the cost of this expert based on the facts and previous facts of the other cases? This is more where it's likely to fall into. I think you're actually going to have a decent shot at that being a useful tool. But again, you got to keep it mathematical, something empirical, not something where there's really room for movement. And you have like a really, really long chain of events and you need to keep track of it. I think it's great for highlighting those events. In other words, this date, she said to do this, then she changed her mind. I think all of that is fine, right? But this is really where it begins and ends. So if you are representing an AI developer and you're in this presentation, I don't mean to crap all over your clients, but I'm going to tell you when I represent my clients or I have to go look at whether or not my client was injured by an AI tool, you're going to know everything that I'm looking for in this presentation. And if this is not how they were using it, I guarantee I'm going to find a problem. It's kind of like Warren Buffett said, you put a cop on anyone for 500 miles, you're going to find a speeding ticket. Well, unfortunately, I think with AI, if you, have me track an AI's activity for more than like 24 hours, I'm definitely going to find a problem. All right, so let's talk about the first hazard of AI is watching out for bias, right? This is a very obvious bias case. Now, I know a lot of people are going to tune me out when I talk about bias, right? But we're going to get to different types of bias here in a second, so it's not just about that. But remember when I was talking to you about reinforcement learning of AI? Well, turns out a lot of the people that used Grok's AI chatbot were part of, sort of the lunatic branch of the world population. And so the chatbot learned through multiple uses by the same lunatics to develop certain prejudices and very frightening posts. So because I guess a lot of rational seeking people were maybe not using the AI chatbot as much, and more of the wackadoodles were, it started spewing out a bunch of anti-Semitic posts. It was also suggesting that there should be violence against a Minnesota state senator, and even showed pictures of her house, as well as, how you could break into her house, right? And so it was really kind of concerning because it was suggesting this material back to the users. And I'm guessing it was because it's reinforcement-based learning, and it was being used and complimented or told that it did a good job every time it did this with its before more people started seeing it and becoming concerned. So I guess the early users were also reflecting anti-Semitic posts. So it's kind of like a giant mirror. But the more people of a specific thought process that use it early are going to train it for the rest of us consumers over time. So it is really something to be concerned about. And in this particular case, this is not super old. This is from last July, so 8-9 months ago. I don't know if that's correct. 7, 8, 9 months, somewhere in that ballpark, right? So this is one type of biases. It depends who is training it, kind of like a puppy, right? If it's someone who's teaching the puppy all these bad habits, it's going to have bad habits. If it lets it pee on the floor, doesn't take it outside regularly, it's going to have these bad habits, right? That you got to treat it like that puppy. Then you have different types of bias that are a little more nuanced. This is, and I think we're going to have time to watch it. This is about an AI tool that Harvard Medical School was evaluating, and it showed a bias in terms of the absence of data. Remember, the key ingredients for AI are your algorithm and your data set. Well, if you have a gap in data for the data set, you're going to have a skewed or biased result. So bias is not necessarily like, a civil rights issue. It can also just be the way the data is skewed because there's not enough data to fully evaluate the issue. So you want a well-rounded event. And in this particular issue, they were evaluating AI tools and they were having trouble marrying the results of the AI tool with certain rural populations, because in rural areas, they have less access to healthcare centers, and because the access is diluted, in other words, it's further away, it's harder to get an appointment, they don't take all types of insurance, right? There are more people in rural areas tend to be less likely to go in for routine issues, and they're less likely to get flu shots or these other things. They are less likely to seek medical care unless it is an extremely serious life-threatening injury, because it's not as available to them. Whereas, in certain areas like where I live, and also me, I love to go to the doctor because I do not like feeling bad because it slows me down. And in case you can't tell, I talk extremely fast. Um, it, you're more likely to have more records on what I'm going to do, right? Oh, she was feeling bad, she wanted a Z-Pack, or something like that. I'm going to keep going in. So I'm going to see if this plays, because we do have the time, and it's more entertaining than I am. And we will have to skip this ad here shortly. And let me see. If you cannot hear it, I apologize. I don't think you guys can hear it. I'm very, very sorry. So we will skip it. I do apologize for that, guys. I was hoping you'd be able to hear it. But if you Google Harvard Medical School AI system, you will find this video. And I did find that it was really, really interesting in discussing, the absence of certain types of usage and how that creates a bias. So if you have family members who, anytime I say the word bias, immediately go, well, you just think we hate everyone. I'm like, I don't think that at all. Sometimes I'm not talking about civil rights issues. Sometimes I'm talking just about an absence in data and how that can skew results, and just being mindful of that, right? That's why you want one of those well-rounded data sets. And now it doesn't even want to go. Come on. There we go. All right. And then the next one, it's not trustworthy. Oh my goodness. There are so many cases like this now. So many. In fact, there were 2 more this morning that my associate handed me. This is a lawsuit where, of course, the attorneys used AI, right? And they produced a brief because they were tired. They had too many deadlines. They were just exhausted. And so they asked AI to help them find cases, right? Well, unfortunately, United States District Court for the Central District of Florida figured it out because they have law clerks. And in case you aren't familiar with federal law clerks, they tend to be very researchy. And my husband was a former federal law clerk, or magistrate, and these people love to research stuff. They love to read these cases. He falls right into the stereotypical, like, I just love the law for the research, whereas I'm much more like, I love the law to see what we can do. But they will find out because they check your sites. And of course, the other side is going to check your sites as well. It's they're doing their job, right? And they're going to find that sometimes your sites do not exist, right? And so it's going to try to influence, you with the case law it thinks you want. And so it's going to send you back things. And kind of like your drunk uncle, it's always confident, seldom correct. It is going to fabricate. Sometimes they call it AI illusions. No, it's just a fabrication. They make up citations, make up cases, make up language, and it's interesting because some people say, oh, how would you know? Well, in this particular case, the judge was talking about how the cases that they referenced when he went to, try and pull them up, one didn't exist, but then the language that they cut and pasted from those cases had different font sizes, different fonts. So the language didn't even look like it actually came from a federal opinion, because eventually the court asked them to produce these cases. So when they said, hey, AI, that case you sent me, produce it, it looked completely insane. It did not look anything like what a traditional, Westlaw citation looks like, where it's very predictable in how it's going to be formatted. And what's interesting about this, they got fined $31,000. But what I find interesting is some people think it's just certain types of the bar association. Everyone in every bar association knows there's certain attorneys that you're just like, ew, they're not so great. This was K&L Gates. No offense to anyone online from K&L Gates. This is a, international, I think, firm. So it's probably one of the most coveted employers for new grads fresh out of law school. And this happened to them. So, if it's happening to them, it could really happen anywhere, including, someone in your office that you think is doing a great job and really putting in the research. But even they have temptations in lives and they're exhausted and they're just like, oh, I just need one case to help me out here. We see if ChatGPT knows what it is because I can't find it. All right. Here's another one. This one I really like because I find journalists sometimes to just be borderline intolerable. But Chicago Tribune put out a summer reading list. Oh, these are the best books that you have to read, and essentially the Chicago Tribune, which is a major newspaper in a major market, right? It's up there with the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, Miami Herald, right? Boston Globe. She had to come out and admit that she made it up. And because she just used ChatGPT. So only 5 of the 15 titles that she recommended were actually real. And in fact, it actually credited authors with writing books that didn't exist. So authors got inquiries too, because there's no limitation to what they will fabricate. They will create false authors, false books, false storylines, or take real judges and equate false opinions to those judges. In fact, going back to the K&L Gates issue, there was in June 2023, it was the first time that, someone had been caught using ChatGPT to create a brief. And in that brief, and this was in New York, I think it was either Eastern or Southern District of New York, they were attributing false opinions with judges. And that particular judge was like a draconian genius. And he made the plaintiff, he made that attorney as a plaintiff's attorney in a airline injury case of some kind, write letters to all the judges that he accused of, that his brief accredited with these absurd opinions, and telling them about it, as well as write a letter to his client admitting what he did wrong. So essentially he had that judge had that attorney, even though he's only fined $5,000, basically have to admit to malpractice and admit to every judge in his jurisdiction that he was not doing his job, which I think was just like evil genius, Dr. Evil, amazing. But anyways, the Chicago Tribune did the same thing, and it was because at that summer they were going through budget cuts. And 20% of the staff was, losing its job, having to take early buyouts from their roles. And so this attorney was probably overwhelmed, looking for other work, trying to, author was overwhelmed, looking for other work, worried about losing their job, and was trying to put out as much content as possible. And unfortunately created a false summer reading list, and then had to reach out to all the authors that she offended by, crediting them with writing something that didn't exist. So there is, a lot of room for problems here, and it is not limited. There's also confidentiality problems. So this is CLE, so we'll actually talk about a little law here. So this is pending in the Southern District of New York, and this was just a motion to dismiss. But essentially what happened is Teladoc is a telehealth company. They do online, visitations, which most health providers now do, where you have the option to do an online presentation or online visit with your provider, and in the process, of course, you give them your name, you tell them what's plaguing you, right? My name is Sarah, and, I think I have pink eye, or, my name is Sarah, I'm X amount of pounds. There's no way I'm revealing that on Justia, but I weigh this, and I am, this age, and I'm going through perimenopausal symptoms, or I'm trying to lose weight, or I think I have an STD, whatever it is, right? You're telling this to them. Well, the problem is Teladoc Health had tracking pixels on them, specifically the Facebook tracking pixel. And what this did is it recorded all the information that went in and then used that associated with the consumer's IP address. So if you don't know what an IP address is, it is your physical, it is not physical, excuse me, it is your address on the internet. In other words, if your IP address is 183 dot whatever, that is where you are. It knows that this computer at this location is using AT&T internet and has this IP address. And it was basically saying, okay, teledoc, I think I have gonorrhea. These are my symptoms. And then the next day, people would log into Facebook and it would be like, here's your VD medication. Come to your local Walgreens to get your tetanus shot or whatever it is that cures VD. And people were noticing it. And it was designed to include or to bolster advertisements, because if you clicked on it, whatever website was hosting that particular pixel and that ad would get 2 cents for every time someone clicked on an ad, right? So I don't know that Teladoc knew this is what they were doing, but as a result, they got sued for violations of the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, as well as several state law claims. And they are now, not necessarily going to trial just yet, but they were unable to get out of it on a simple motion to dismiss because there was a intent to commit an act that could be criminal, which will satisfy the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. They're also facing violations of the Unfair and Deceptive Trade Practices Act. They will also face negligence claims because HIPAA in a lot of places is used as a negligence framework, even though HIPAA doesn't actually allow a private right of action. So, and some states have allowed that to occur. So, and there's also various privacy issues. So Teladoc is facing a major issue, and they're also going to have to report this, and I think they already did, to the Office of Civil Rights, all because they wanted to use, bolster their ad revenue and use an AI tool that they didn't understand. And there was a lot of leakage of confidentiality. We're seeing a lot of this in the last, I think it got announced on the 18th or 19th. Microsoft Copilot has had a lot of confidentiality issues. Most recently, you can Google Microsoft Copilot confidentiality issues, but they found recently that the Microsoft Copilot was going in and reading people's draft emails and their notes, and it was ignoring like sensitivity markings. You're allowed in Copilot to say, don't read anything marked confidential, right? Well, it was just ignoring those and it was reading it. And so in responding to emails or in conversations with other people or recorded notes, it was pulling information of a similar topic out of people's draft emails or confidential emails and sending it back to other people. So in other words, it was inadvertently leaking data. And this has been the best article I saw on it was from the BBC, but this is definitely happening. And it's going to continue happening. Another one is that there's a lawsuit pending, I believe, in California right now. I forgot to write down the site, so my apologies to you guys. But it was how a company called Eightfold, what it does, it's an AI tool that essentially scans the internet for all the information available on a prospective hire. So you've got Sarah Anderson down here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It pulls all the information it can find about me online. So it's at my website, at my LinkedIn, my Facebook, my Gmail posts and reviews. So it'll say, Sarah doesn't like seafood. She's a middle-aged white suburban mom. Looks like she went to the University of Georgia at LSU Law. According to her LinkedIn profile, she's been at this company. She likes cyber law. And it would compile all this information and then bundle it up for insurers looking for prospective hires or looking to vet prospective hires. Well, that's actually a violation of the Fair Credit Reporting Rights Act because you're not supposed to compile consumer data like that for hiring purposes. So this is just another confidentiality-ish issue that most people don't think about when they talk about AI. Because even though there's not a ton of laws about, now there are some state laws about what you can do with AI, a lot of them popped up in 2024. There's not ones that have fully assessed what it's used for. And so it can trigger a lot of other problems. This one is a security issue. Copilot actually got to sit in on this presentation about 2 years ago when I was in San Francisco. And it showed a major security issue with Copilot. And it's because AI apps, the way they're written in computer code, is they're designed to anticipate unanticipated actions. Standard software that is not classified as machine learning or artificial intelligence is designed to do basic things. There's a limit on what it will do as designed by the initial contractor. Whereas AI, especially reinforcement learning, is designed to adapt to whatever the user wants and respond accordingly and go beyond what is initially coded to do. So there's something called remote code execution. So in other words, a bad guy gets into your system. It sees that you're using Copilot, right? It's going to track your usage of Copilot over time, the malware is, and it's going to start reading your emails, responding to your emails on your behalf in a manner consistent with how you previously used Copilot. So this has been a major issue. All the attacker has to do is either watch how you're using Copilot or anticipate how you're using Copilot, and it will start using a legitimate tool to perform, prohibited functions. And so this is really interesting. It's by Zenity Labs. If you're interested in it all, it's very easy to find research. It's open. It's created by an Israeli company, so you might see something, so if you have, blocks on your firewall, it doesn't allow you to contact, Israeli websites. This is an Israeli group, but I do recommend trying to take a look at it and seeing what it's really about before you try to force Copilot onto any of your staff, because unless you are very secure, it is very easy to abuse. And then, like I said, earlier we talked about voice recognition. You're going to run into biometric information privacy laws, as well as other laws that were drafted to address one thing and were not drafted to address necessarily AI, but AI inadvertently kind of stumbles into. And this is a great option, or a great example. So a gentleman named Brandon Baker was applying for a job at CVS, I think as a pharmacy tech. And as part of the hiring process, CVS would videotape the interview and then upload the interview to a third-party platform that would then analyze what was happening with the person's face, their gestures, their tone, and look for signs of deception, as well as signs of, substance abuse, and other issues with the candidate. Well, here's the thing. In some states, that's fine. But I can tell you in Massachusetts and Illinois, it's not, because Massachusetts prohibits employers specifically from using lie detection tests as a condition of employment. Well, of course, CVS says they get sued and they say we weren't using a lie detector. We were using, software analysis platform. And it says, well, here's the thing. The definition of a lie detector says, any other device, mechanism, or instrument used to interpret deception or, evading questions, right? That fits in the definition of a lie detector test. And so CVS lost its motion to dismiss and is proceeding to trial. Last I checked, they had not yet settled the case, but I imagine they will. And of course, they're doing this all over the country because it was a standard practice by a global chain, right? So it's just another example of how if you don't know what you're doing with AI, you're not only going to stumble into confidentiality issues, but you're going to stumble into some legal issues as well, right? A couple of new laws that have come on the scene in the last 2 years. The first one is any AI robocalls are now not allowed in California unless you tell them it is being done with AI. So I know a lot of people get these all the time, while California being like the 5th largest GDP in the United States, just in and of itself, if a law is passed in California that withstands, constitutional scrutiny and, preliminary injunctions and all that stuff, it's going to eventually be interpreted into the rest of the country, and other countries will copy it. Like the California's Consumer Privacy Act and then Consumer Privacy Rights Act, started just in California and now it's in like 22 states, or a version of it is in like 22 states, right? So we'll see this copied through other states. So if your client is using any type of robocall with AI, you might want to let them know that like it's not allowed in California, and unless they plan on creating a market within their company that just ignores California, which would be disastrous from an economic standpoint, they need to be aware of this. Another thing is any healthcare provider that is using generative AI to correspond with their potential patients has to disclose that and give people the option to reach a real person. In other words, a real practitioner, and not just make them stuck in that AI vortex where they say, I don't understand your submission. Please select from one of the following menu options. In other words, that's illegal now in California. Both of these are enforced by the state of California. So some people seem to take solace in that. I will say they and the state of Texas, anytime it says enforced by the state, they're actually really aggressive, but they're going to start out with the bigger companies. So you may receive like a cure notice, but it's something to be aware of. So just another reason to be very careful when you're, incorporating AI products into either your practice or you're advising your clients that are thinking about incorporating AI. Again, we've got some more fake cases. Again, you've got, major, law firms utilizing this. They're getting sanctioned. The sanctions noticeably are not super, large, right? But it's not confined again to the, small firms of the world or the shady, law firms of the world where they have, the ridiculous billboards and stuff like that. And by the way, I'm not judging any of those people. I think it's amazing if you can build a business from scratch. So, but, a lot of them, people think that this is done by, sort of, the less white collar of the attorney style, but it's not. It's everybody. I've got 2 more cases that just came out from the 5th Circuit. Most recent I'm going to give you is 2026 Westlaw 456842 Fletcher versus Experian Information Solutions. This attorney was quite stupid. She not only utilized AI to create a bunch of false briefs with false citations, false law, but she then lied about it on multiple occasions to the court. And in addition to previous fines, was fined another $2,500. And the court said that they had the right to do this under Federal Rule 46C, as well as Federal Rule Procedure 11. So in other words, the courts are now starting to actively get involved in this. The Fifth Circuit previously, which is my circuit, which is why I talk about them so much, actually previously tried to create a local rule that would require every attorney submitting a brief check that they had not used and certify under penalty on Federal Rule Civil Procedure 11, but they were not using generative AI to create their brief. That rule was ultimately struck down and not implemented, but I do expect to see more federal courts, especially as this continues, revive that and try to re-implement that into their local rules. And of course, the ABA has, essentially a formal opinion, that says we have to ethically consider how we use AI in our practice, and it can only be used to improve client satisfaction. We can't charge unreasonable fees. There are a bunch of AI rules across the United States. I gave you guys a link to Law 360 that'll show you in the court system, the federal court system, and some state courts that have reported it, what their local rules are. So I really encourage you to take a look at these, especially if you're using any AI in your practice, just to make sure that you're compliant. Right. And the last issue, and this is my favorite slide, despite the content, the last issue that I have with AI is that it's self-reinforcing. Just like we said, it's like a puppy. If you teach it to pee on the floor or let it pee on the floor, it's going to keep peeing on the floor. AI is using self-reinforcement learning, machine learning in its platforms, especially all the ones that you use, Copilot, Grammarly, ChatGPT. It's all self-reinforcing. And you know what else is self-reinforcing? Dictators that do scary stuff and people that are afraid to challenge them. And so I gave you, I think, pretty politically innocuous examples. I don't think anyone agree with me that these are not great individuals, right? But I just wanted to explain that, like, when you have this constant feedback loop of, oh yeah, great job, great job, great job, and you happen to have a lunatic that developed it, or a large number of lunatics that are using it, you're going to end up with absurd and obscene results, kind of like you would see if you were, a citizen of Russia or North Korea. So I tried, like I said, it's a little bit of a scare tactic, but I wanted to show you. All right, let's go into sort of my ethical rules for AI at work. Like I said, let's hit some empirical rules. I tend to, like I said, just something you can take home. Right. Well, the ABA says that you can use AI provided that it saves client money, but does not impact privilege. Again, any tool that you're taking client notes on that are automated is probably going to have a confidentiality leak with those. So I do recommend that. But if you are, summarizing a deposition, I think, and you need to save client money and you've got to keep moving, or that client's on a budget, I don't think it's a bad thing to do depositions unless they're under seal, no confidentiality issues there. And they generally do an okay job. It's not as great as perhaps you would like, but it'll give you different answers, like how many times did they object to form? What was the general gist of the application of the, if you've got a case with a ton of fact witnesses, what was this person's factual scenario that they were called to testify about? So I do think this is a good one. If it saves money, doesn't impact privilege, right? In other words, you're analyzing something that is not considered attorney-client privilege, I don't see an issue with it. Also, to check cites, if you've got an expert opinion on the other side and you want to see if their citations that they gave you are legitimate, you can run it through AI first, but as one of my other rules will tell you, you got to manually check the results. Next, I want you to implement policies at your law firm on who can use the AI, what it can be used for, and give them the training required. In other words, do not allow every paralegal unfeathered use to ChatGPT. In fact, it's not allowed at my firm. We are not allowed to utilize any of those tools because I don't trust that someone is going to manually check it the same way I will. I don't trust that, some receptionist is not going to utilize it, when they're not supposed to, or someone who is, perhaps someone I might fire in the future because they're not great at their job is going to use it to try to skirt the rules. You want to be very specific on who can use it and what it can be used for, and then teach them about the specific usage of it. Put it in your policies if you have policies so that you can fire someone who uses it out of turn. Downside of that is, right, if it's in your policies and you don't follow those policies, they can be used against you in court. So just something to keep in mind. Limit its use and who can use it. Only leave it for your more trustworthy associates and yourself. Next one is you want to prohibit its use for anything that equates to legal advice or making decisions. If it is going to make a decision on how to advise a client, don't utilize it, right? If it is going to tell you anything beyond something purely empirical, like I anticipate the budget for this case is going to be X based on what I know so far, that is fine. But saying, I don't think it would be good for us to take this approach based off of a decision AI made is not, I would say, an acceptable use, because technically then that, just like attorneys get in trouble for allowing paralegals to make legal decisions, you could be put in the exact same boat for allowing your artificial intelligence to make what is supposed to be a legal, issue legal advice or counsel. The next one is you want to vet these AI tools. You want to evaluate the privacy policies and security credentials, at least show that you did your due diligence before incorporating them into your practice. We had my son's baseball team meeting last night at our house, and I'm not really much of a drinker, but the coach's wife, and of course you got to suck up to the coach's wife, right? So your kid gets over playing time. It's like, have a margarita with me. So I had half a margarita, and I will tell you, when you don't drink and you eat, just a little bit, I have not been feeling 100, and maybe that's just because I'm old. But anyways, you want to vet these third-party tools. You want to check, run them through Westlaw and LexisNexis. Have they been sued before, right? Are they facing an infringement suit? There are a ton of lawsuits out there right now on AI infringement. That is actually the most common type of lawsuit regarding artificial intelligence, is infringement between different types of AI vendors. So you want to make sure they're not embroiled in that, right? Next, you want to take a look at their privacy policy. Is it consistent with your state laws, right? In other words, you really want to look to see if it's consistent with California, because they tend to have some of the more strenuous ones. And then you also want to talk to them about security. It's not unreasonable for you to ask to see, if they have cybersecurity insurance, because if they have a breach and they have all your data, guess what? You now have a breach. So you want to make sure that they're well insured, right? And that they're operating securely. Ask them if they're SOC 2 credentialed. In other words, do they have certain security uh, improvements on their system that would make them less penetrable to a cyber attack, right? Because AI tools has a lot of data, and not only would it just be a breach, but they can also skew the results by changing the data over time, and that has been a major national security issue. You want to check and adjust your default settings whenever you get a new machine. So kind of like I said, I do not allow Copilot to be used in my office. There's a ton of security issues. I think it's going to continue to have security issues, right? I know why Microsoft is pushing it on us. I don't blame them, but it's not allowed at my office. So you want to see, does it automatically start running when they turn on the machine? Do you even want that on your machine? I would take it off. You want to see what the default settings are. Is your team set up to automatically have a note taker installed, so that all of your calls that you have via Teams are recorded in some note taker and uploaded to some cloud that you have no control of? These are the types of things you want to check. So you want to let your security department take a look at it and see, what do we want this exact AI to be used for? Or what is our policy on AI? How does this consistent with our policy? What is the default setting, that we're talking about? Next one, manually check all the results. Even if you are using it for something empirical, right? And you're using it for case, evaluation. What is the potential value of this case? Or how much is this case going to cost to litigate, right? Even if you're doing all of that, you still want to manually check your results, to make sure that it has not misconstrued some of the information, because a lot of these tools are new. The fact that they're popping up like wildfire is not a good sign. It means, one, there's going to be a lot of infringement cases, which there are, right? Like I just said, there's a ton of them. I think there's over 25,000 infringement cases being filed on average for the last 3 years, right? You also want to make sure, right, that it actually works, because in an unregulated industry like cybersecurity and AI, which is largely unregulated, anyone can pop up and market a product as their own, or say it does X, Y, or Z, and they will continue to do that until they get sanctioned or they are sued, because most of the laws that would prevent them from doing that, like the FTC Act, require federal intervention, because there's no direct right, or there's no private right of action under those laws. So it takes, in other words, it's going to take a long time for them to get caught. And as you know, litigation also takes forever. So even if they can be sued by an individual consumer, coming to resolution is going to take a while. And as you know, most consumers are more interested in their individual justice than they are about stopping the behavior altogether. And there's nothing wrong with that, because it's not everyone's job to fix the world, right? So just manually check your results, because you never know if you are getting something you're actually paying for or not. And you're not required to, right? Just like I don't go to the doctor and say, hey, I don't think this medication you prescribed, is chemically balanced with my other medication. That's not my job. That's my doctor and my pharmacist's job. It's not your job to know if it works perfectly, but you do have to do your due diligence. Second to last one, I would block Copilot, ChatGPT, uninstall Copilot, block Grammarly. I would get all of these things off of your computers. Ask your IT department to uninstall it from your servers. Make sure that your employees don't have access to it, especially if you're a bigger firm. Just like we saw with K&L Gates, right? It can be anyone, Morgan and Morgan. All these law firms have someone who are going to use it, and it's ultimately going to fall through the cracks. But of course, who's it going to fall on? The named partners. They're the ones on the insurance policy, and your insurance is going to skyrocket, as well as ruin your reputation with a judge. And nobody wants that. And your last rule is to keep AI used to lower level or lower risk tasks. Again, something empirical, just based on basic data, numbers, right? Assessments, maybe like a little bit of a depot summary in a case with a ton of fact witnesses, or grouping plaintiffs into categories, something low level that does not equate to legal advice. If you're going to allow it at all, I don't allow it in my office. Obviously, some of it I can't avoid. It predictive text patterns. I can't stop it. I can't uninstall it. But again, you always have to make sure you do your absolute best to keep it to a low level task, very, restricted uses, and then only certain people can use it. If you guys have any questions, my name is Sarah Anderson. I'm here at SWA Law. I'm licensed in 4 states. I'd love to help you out if you ever need it. And if you just have any questions or just want to connect on LinkedIn, please scan the QR code and I'd love to meet you. And this is, in case you can tell, this is my favorite topic. So feel free to reach out. Do you want me to stop sharing, Nina?
No, it's okay. We'll leave the QR code up for a moment just if people want to go ahead and connect with you. But we do have a few questions, and I know we have a few minutes to reach our full 60. So I'll go ahead and go through those now. And the first one is, if you do not think ChatGPT or Copilot are particularly reliable, what do you recommend? This user says they use ChatGPT and DeepSeek, and they ask if DeepSeek is considered more reliable. So what would you recommend when it comes to models to use?
None of them. None of them. Now, there is a certain amount of generative AI built into Westlaw and LexisNexis, so I would use that. If you are insistent on using some form of AI to help you in your research, I would use that. If you are struggling with how to word something, maybe your brief is reading as very aggressive, and that's not appropriate because of a multitude of reasons. And you want a softer way to say something, I think you can change different language out in individual paragraphs using ChatGPT. But other than that, I do not recommend it unless you're doing something mathematical under any circumstances. I just think there's so many ways in which it can get out of hand very quickly because it's addictive. It's designed to be, temptation. So I'm sorry, but I would just not mess with it. What's the next one?
Awesome. The next one is specific to Grammarly. So you mentioned blocking Grammarly in some of your rules, but it wasn't necessarily expanded upon. So this person asks to expand upon why that would be something that you'd want to block and any other tips you might have related to that.
Because when you input your data into Grammarly and say, hey, what is wrong with this specific paragraph? It's likely, depending on what you're doing, could be client material, either confidential or privileged material. Like maybe you're doing a write-up of this plaintiff's medical history, or you're writing a brief that hasn't been filed yet. That's technically privileged. Anything you input into Grammarly is used to adjust the system. So it all goes into the data model and it can come back out at a later time. I'm not saying that the way it's going to come back out is going to be attributed to, Marcia Smith on this state wrote about this plaintiff and she thought we did a good job. So here's what we did for her. It's not going to come back out like that. But technically it's not putting data into a privileged system or a system that will protect privilege or client confidential information. And don't forget, if you are working with anything medical, right, you're technically a business associate under the High-Tech Act. So you have to be careful because anything you put into these models will continue to regenerate in a different form.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. And then this next question is, what do you think of AI apps used for discovery and deposition analysis or similar uses? Do you have that same stance of not recommending them, or what do you think?
I think if you have like fact witness depositions and it's going to save your client money to give a synopsis of what they testified about, I think that's fine. If you need to do a quick summary, I don't really have a problem with that. Now, obviously, I think you go back and just double check quickly, like, oh, they were talking about the car accident on March 9th. Okay. And then you can put it aside. I would just do, like I said, manually check the results, do some spot checks, but I think that's fine. It's consistent with the ABA rule. It saves clients money. It's a low risk task, right? And it doesn't mean you don't have to go back and read it or whatnot, but you'd at least know where to start when you have to go back and adjust your research. So I don't have a problem with that. I just, again, consistent with those 8 rules. Low risk task, only certain people can use it. Manually check your results.
So thank you, Sarah. And then I think our last question for today is, if I obtain a client or potential new client's consent to use Dialpad or another note-taking service that uses AI on a telephone call or a Zoom call, will that protect me from liability?
No. Because one, what are your settings that it's on? Did you check the default settings? Are those notes automatically being updated to the cloud, or are they saving locally on your server, right? You don't know how those notes are being saved. The next thing is the client has to be able to give you informed consent. Every single rule of professional ethics says informed consent. So you might want to let them know that it's a possibility these go into a cloud. I don't know what happens to them. I don't know how they get used to inform the machine, whether they're used to train the machine. I don't know if they stay local. If you have the answers to those questions, then go ahead and then you have recorded response. But if you don't have the answers to those questions, then you have not given that client the option of informed consent. And I know I sound like such a rule follower and so annoying. I'm just trying to keep you guys just conservative on it and making sure you just approach it correctly.
Yeah, safety first. Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you for taking our audience questions. We really appreciate you doing that. And to all of our audience members that submitted questions, we always really appreciate your participation. So thank you. We want to thank you all so much for joining us for another Justia webinar. And thank you to Sarah again for your time and your insight. I wanted to remind you all, as I did at the top of the presentation, of the services available to you through our website platform, Justia Elevate. It's our innovative, feature-packed website solution designed specifically for law firms. It's built on a WordPress platform and offers tools like the Justia AI Writer, which is designed to help you create effortless content for your website, the AI-powered Justia Chat to help you enhance your leads, and FAQs for AI to help you better your chances of showing up in AI results. You'll have everything that you need to stand out online, and plans start at just $80 to $50 a month when paid annually. You can check out the pricing and the full suite of services at elevate.justia.com/price. Thank you all so much for joining, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks so much. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy it, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel for more videos on law practice and legal marketing. See you in our next video.